Hello. Hey, everybody. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, whenever you're viewing this. This is for my U.S. History 1 students. Today we'll be looking at the Declaration of Independence. A couple of things that we need to look at with the Declaration of Independence. One, we've got to keep in mind that it's a very, very slow process for the colonists to declare independence. It's not something they're going to go to very lightly. There's two ways we can break this up. There's external forces and there's internal forces that are going to motivate colonial leaders and everyday common people to move towards independence. So externally, we can look at the beginning of really the move towards independence when King George, on August 23rd, 1775, would reject the Olive Branch Petition that was drafted by John Dickerson. If we're able to watch episode 2 of John Adams in class, you'll get a good sense of who John Dickerson is from Pennsylvania. And you'll get to see a good debate dramatized between John Dickerson and John Adams. So that's rejected. And then he basically says that King George not only rejects it, but he says that anybody who continues rebellion, if and when you're caught, you will be hanged by your neck until you are dead, right? And so this kind of pisses off the colonists to a great extent, so people are moving more and more towards at least the notion of independence. However, it still takes a little while. Even with the rejection of the Olive Branch Petition, what the immediate effect of it isn't independence, but it's a declaration drafted by Dickerson and Jefferson, the Declaration of Causes and Necessities of Taking Up Arms. And this was issued in July 6th of 1775, so a year before the independence. And this specifically rejected the idea of independence and just said basically that Americans would rather die than be enslaved, right? And so they're justifying their use of taking up arms against the British Empire. On December 23rd, King George III issued a royal proclamation closing the American colonies to all trade and commerce, so business is shut down, right? Pretty radical step, given the fact that the sole purpose of the colonies is to generate income for not only the empire, but for the individuals living within the empire. What ends up happening by April 6th of that year is that the colonists are able to open up all of the ports, reopen them up. A lot of them were never really closed, but they're able by April 6th to declare that all of them are open and would remain open and would not be prevented by the British Empire from shipping and receiving. And so they opened up trade to all nations except for Great Britain, right? So this was a profound declaration of economics, right? Which is always the forerunner for any kind of political independence. So, I mean, if they had declared they were independent without being economically independent, it would be very shallow, right? Just like a teenager at home who's having trouble with their parents, right? They can complain all they want about mom's and dad's rules, but if mom and dad ever say, hey, if you don't like our rules, get out of the house, the teenage child, has got to reconsider his or her willingness to express rebellion, right? And so, unless they have actual income coming in, and then they could just leave the house, right? So, this is where the colonists are at. They were already economically independent well before independence, right? And so, the declaration of political independence that's going to come is just a way of preserving what was already happening all along. In 1775, there was a committee of secret correspondence established seeking friendly relations with European nations in an effort to get monetary and perhaps military support from France and perhaps Spain. On March 1776, both France and Spain agreed amongst themselves, although nothing was formalized, that it would be in the interest of both those nation-states to aid the colonists if it ever came to it, right? And obviously it would, especially for France. This would be a great way of getting back at their nemesis, Great Britain, especially after their defeat in the French Indian War. And so that they would be willing to help out the colonists when it came time to it. Without knowing it, the colonists did send a guy named Celestine on March 3rd of 1776 to see what kind of support the colonists could get, military support from France. So the colonists were actively pursuing this as well, obviously. They would have to. There would be no way they could win the British Empire outright unless they had outside support. And so you have the Declaration of Independence being pushed for because of, again, King George's refusal to look at the Olive Branch Petition. And so what's interesting about the Declaration of Independence is it was a hard-fought battle, as you'll see in the episode. In fact, South Carolina had to be really pulled into this. New York abstained from the vote because they were worried about, a bulk of the British Navy outside of their ports ready to invade them. So they were kind of worried. So they would abstain twice from the Declaration. But on July 9th, they would approve that Declaration overwhelmingly. So they would have all 13 colonies in support of this. And you'll get to see this debate in the film episode 2 of John Adams. We'll get to see in class, hopefully, sometime in the next week or so. The other event the internal events that's going to push colonists towards independence is the use of Hessian soldiers, German soldiers, mercenaries brought in. So you had 30,000 foreign troops by the time the Revolutionary War is over. 30,000 Germans are in there. And mercenaries tend to commit atrocities because they really have no stake in it except pay, and so to relieve boredom, they rape, they pillage, they steal. And so the colonists are greatly offended by the fact that they're using mercenaries to fund this war, to fight this war. And so this is going to push a lot of people. The other thing that's going to push a lot of people towards independence is the brilliant writing of Thomas Paine. And what did he write? That's right, Common Sense. 1776, he writes this brilliant document on the obvious necessity of declaring political independence, right? So it was a clear and persuasive scope. Paine listed the advantages and the disadvantages, and the advantages of the colonies, not disadvantages, colonies would enjoy once they had formed themselves into an independent nation. Free trade with other nations and countries around the world was one. Release from England European conflict, so that would be another one. He was kind of referring to the French Indian War when he was talking about that. Freedom from having the appeal to a court 3,000 miles away. So these were very practical reasons for independence. Ideologically, he would attack the very notion of divine right of king, right? Why would people living within the age of reason abide by such an organization of government control? Those days were over, the Common Sense argued. It was a very eloquently and pithy written document. He had some great phrases in there. For example, there is something very absurd, he insisted, in supposing a continent be perpetually governed by an island. So he was able to conjure up powerful images, right? So this idea of a little tiny island governing a great big continent, right? Something incredibly absurd about that. Well, there's nothing really absurd about that at all. It's been happening for a while, but the idea, you can kind of imagine it, like a little pipsqueak island trying to control this huge geographical area at the time. So it had great appeal, Common Sense, for its writing, for its ideological attacks on the divine right of king, and for its practical attacks on the idea of Great Britain governing. Common Sense certainly attacked George III, calling him a royal brute, and so that would be quite popular with people reading this. There were about 150,000 copies sold, which would have been a bestseller back then. I mean, that would be nothing today, but that was considered a bestseller back then. Not King George, General George Washington would order his commissioned officers to keep a copy on them, and people would his officers would read passages of Common Sense to the soldiers when they became tired and were kind of forgetting about why they were fighting and losing morale. So this would be an upbeat. There would be this book would be read in taverns. A lot of the Revolution was produced in taverns with a lot of whiskey, ale, and rum, right? And so people would get fired up under the influence of alcohol listening to this wonderfully constructed language. Common Sense, really, I mean, if there's anything that could be said about Common Sense, it was one of the most brilliant forms of propaganda. So there we have it. That's concept one, the internal and external forces that are going to push the colonial leaders and the people of British America towards becoming the United States of America. I'll talk to you guys later. Email me or raise your hand in class if you have questions. Adios!